Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Storytime. I am your host, Blimp, team leader for the Southern Illinois Monster Hunters team. And on today's episode, we dive into the phenomenon of a creature that terrified the masses and the inhabitants of a town in Illinois called Matoon. This is the story of the Mad Gasser of Matoon. There's no greater phantom attacker in the history of the unexplained in America than the legendary Mad Gasser of Matoon, a bizarre figure who wreaked havoc in the small Illinois town in 1944. This creature turned out to be so elusive that the law enforcement officials eventually declared him non-existent, despite dozens and dozens of eyewitness reports and actual physical evidence that was left behind at the scene of some attacks. Making matters even more interesting was a series of nearly identical attacks that took place in Butort County, Virginia in 1933 and 1944. Social scientists declared that the attacks in Matoon had been nothing more than mass hysteria. But how could the Illinois residents have known anything about the events in Virginia, which were barely publicized, in order to duplicate them so closely? Both of these series of attacks involved a mysterious figure dressed in black who came and went without warning, left very little in the way of clues behind, and or for some reason sprayed a paralyzing gas into the windows of unsuspecting residents. The gas was never identified in either case, and both cases involved fairly isolated areas where the attacks took place. The homes that were attacked in Virginia were in the rural county and Matoon. At the same time, it was a small central Illinois town with no large cities in the vicinity. Also, police officials were totally stumped in both cases. So who or what attacked the unsuspecting citizens of Illinois and Virginia? Was it a mad scientist? A government agency, perhaps? A visitor from another planet? No one will ever know for sure. But the annals of the unknown are plagued with cases of inexplicable attackers who appear and vanish without explanation, prey on the unsuspecting without warning, and then vanish completely, leaving no trace behind. Could such attackers come from another time and place? Another dimension, maybe? Let the reader judge that for himself. Just remember, though, if these attacks can happen in places that follow, they're capable of happening anywhere, even where you live. The Mad Gasser Strikes. A story of Illinois' Mad Gasser begins not in Mattoon in 1944, but rather in Virginia in 1933, 11 years earlier, nearly 500 plus miles away. There's no proof to say that the work in the two cases was completed by a single attacker, but the events were so similar that it would be ridiculous of us not to admit that the coincidence of it being two attackers is extreme. In 1933, Butort County, Virginia was a quiet area of the state and had never really experienced much out of the ordinary. That all began to change on December 22nd when the home of Mr. and Mrs. Cal Huffman near Haymakertown was attacked by a mysterious figure that was unlike anything seen or even heard of in the region before. At around 10 o'clock that evening, Mrs. Huffman stated that she grew nauseated after smelling a strange gas that had been apparently sprayed into her house. She decided to go on to bed, but her husband remained awake and alert to see if the lurker who had sprayed the gas might return. Half an hour later, another wave of gas filled the room. and Huffman immediately went to the home of his landlord, K.W. Henderson. Here, Huffman telephoned the police. An Officer Lemon was dispatched to the scene, and he stayed until around midnight. Immediately after he left, another gas attack was launched on the property, filling both floors of the house. All 8 members of the Huffman family, along with Ashby Henderson, were affected by the gas. Ashby and Cal Huffman have been keeping watch for the return of the prowler and thought that what they saw a man running away after the attack. According to the reports, the gas caused the victims to become very nauseated, gave them a headache, and caused the mouth and throat muscles to restrict. Alice, the Huffman's 19-year-old daughter, was most affected by the gas, and she had to be given artificial respiration in order to revive her. She was said to have experienced convulsions for some time afterward. Her doctor, Dr. S.F. Driver, later reported that while part of her condition was caused by extreme nervousness over the attack, he had no doubt that the gas attack was responsible for the fact that her condition continued. However, no one could determine what kind of gas was used. Dr. W.N. Breckenridge, who assisted with the police investigation, ruled out either chloroform and tear gas, or who could have sprayed it into the house. The only clue that Lemon had found at the scene was the print of a woman's shoe beneath the window the attacker was thought to have sprayed his gas through. The next attack took place in the Boutique County town of Cloverdale. Clarence Hall and his wife and 2 children came home from church service at around 9 p.m. on Christmas Eve. 5 minutes after they entered the house, they smelled a strange odor. Hall went into one of the back rooms of the house to investigate and came back moments later, staggering and swaying. His wife, who also felt nauseated and weak, had to drag him outside. The effects of the gas did not linger with Mr. Hall, but Mrs. Hall experienced eye irritation for the next 2 days. Dr. Breckenridge again held the police, and he noted that the gas tasted sweet and that he detected a trace of formaldehyde in it. He also had no idea what the gas was, though, and investigators again found only one clue at the scene. Apparently, a nail had been pulled from one of the windows. Was this to make it possible to spray the gas inside? Another attack occurred on December 27th when A.L. Kelly, a welder from Troutville, and his mother were sprayed in their home. Oddly, the police learned that a man and a woman in a 1933 Chevrolet had been driving back and forth in front of Kelly's house around the time of the attack. A neighbor managed to get a partial plate number on the car, but the police weren't able to locate it. No attacks took place over the next 2 weeks, but on January 10th, gas was struck again at the home of Homer Hilton near Haymaker Town. Hilton and his wife were asleep upstairs, and their daughter, Mrs. Moore, whose husband was out of town on business, was sleeping downstairs. Around 10 o'clock, she got up to attend to her baby and later recalled that she heard mumbling voices outside and someone fiddling with the window. Moments later, she said the room filled with gas, and as she grabbed her child, she experienced a marked feeling of numbness. The window where the noise came from had been slightly broken for some reason. This may have allowed the gasser access to the house. Author Michael P. Shoemaker, an excellent article on the subject of Fate magazine in 1985, suggests that we could theorize that Mrs. Moore was simply spooked by the wind blowing through the crack in the glass, if not for the voices that she heard. Again, Some might say that this was only her imagination, but as well for the fact that a neighbor, J. Let's see, what's his name here? J. J.D. Kinsey, no J.E. Poge, also heard voices around the same time. Also, on January 10th, a Troutville man named J.D. Kinsey was also attacked. This case was not reported until later and was different from the others. Apparently, Dr. Driver investigated his case and stated that the gas used in the attack was chlorine gas. Chlorine was then mentioned in several subsequent accounts until a Roanoke chemistry professor later ruled it out as a possible cause. It ruled it out. After a few quiet nights, the gas returned on January 16th. This time attacked the home of F.B. Duval near Bonsack. Duval left the house to summon the police, and as he reached a nearby intersection, saw a man run up to a parked car and speed away. He and Officer Lemon spent several hours driving around searching for the car, but they found nothing. The next day, Lemon again found the prints of a woman's shoe, this time where the car had been parked. On January 19th, the gas was struck again. This time, gas was sprayed into the windows of a Mrs. Campbell, a former judge's wife near Cloverdale. She was sitting near the window in question, and moments after seeing the shade move, became sick. A few nights later, the gas attacks reached their peak, with 5 attacks taking place over a period of 3 nights. The first attack took place on January 21st when Howard Crawford and his wife returned to their home between Cloverdale and Troutville. Mr. Crawford went into the house first to light a lamp, but quickly began stumbling back out. He was overwhelmed by the gas, which Dr. Driver again said was chlorine. Police officers were able to find only a single clue at the house: the crank of an old automobile. The metal crank seemed to have been absolutely nothing to do with the attack, but it was simply too strange of an item to be left behind. On the other hand, it was also too common of an item in those days to be traced. On January 22nd, 3 separate attacks occurred in Carvin's Cove. In just 1 hour's time, the gas recovered a distance of about 2 miles, attacking in order moving southward the homes of Ed Reedy, George C. Riley, and Raymond Etter. In each of the houses, the victims all claimed to have numbness and nausea. Riley called his mother, a Roanoke police officer, and a blockade of the nearby roads was quickly put into place. Although the gasser managed to elude the authorities, one of Mr. Etter's sons claimed to have seen the figure disappearing from the direction of the house. He gave chase and even fired a few shots at the man from a distance of 30 yards, but he got away. On January 23rd, Mrs. R.H. Hartzell and her family spent the night with some neighbors, and when they returned to their Pleasantdale church home at 4:30 a.m., they discovered that the house had been filled with gas. For some bizarre reason, someone had also piled wood and brush up against their front door during the night. The only plausible motive that I can see for this would have been to keep the family from escaping once the house was filled with gas. This means that the illicit gasser must have believed that the family was home at the time of the attack. This new series of gassings had the entire community in an uproar. Families who lived in more isolated areas began spending the night with friends and neighbors, hoping to find security in numbers. Local men began patrolling the roadways at night, armed with shotguns and rifles. The local newspaper, the Roanoke Times, stated that it was sure the gassers would be caught, and it pleaded with the farmers not to shoot anyone. The authorities were now growing more concerned. And prior to this, they had believed the gassings had been nothing more than pranks played by some mischievous boys. Now the sheriff's office was forced to admit that if this had been the case, the boys would have been caught long before. They had begun to investigate the idea that a mentally deranged person might be the culprit, perhaps even having uh, even an unhinged gas victim from World War I. On January 25th, the gasser may have attempted to strike again, but this time was foiled. Around 9 o'clock on that evening, a dog at the home of Chester Snyder began barking. Alerted, Snyder jumped out of bed and grabbed his shotgun. Darting outside, he ran across the yard and fired a shot at a man that he saw creeping along a ditch that was about 20 feet from the house. Apparently, though, the shot went wide and Snyder only had one shell in his gun. He ran back inside for more ammunition, but by the time he returned, the man was gone. He called the police, and a deputy sheriff named Zimmerman investigated the scene. He managed to find footprints that led from the road to the ditch and signs that the prowler had been hidden behind a tree on the property for some time before the dog sounded an alarm. More tracks led from the tree to the house and then stopped, marked the point where the man had retreated. Visitors who had left the Snyder home shortly before the happening recalled seeing a man about half a mile away on the road. There was, of course, no real evidence to say that the prowler was actually the gasser. But based on the evidence that had been occurring, any sort of incident like this was immediately on suspect. On January 28th, the gasser did manage to pull off another attack, and he would actually return again to this same residence and attack again. The home belonged to Ed Stanley of Cloverdale, and Stanley, his wife, and 3 other adults were also affected by the mysterious gas. Frank Guy, a hired hand on the farm, ran outside immediately after the gas filled the house and stated that he saw 4 men running away in the direction of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He ran back inside to get his gun, and when he returned to the yard, he couldn't even see the fleeing figures, but could hear them in the woods. He fired several shots in the direction of the voices, but felt that it was unlikely that they hit anything. The gasser returned again 2 nights and again attacked the Stanley house. This time, however, Stanley heard a sound outside the window before the attack took place. What happened after that remains a mystery, as no further details were reported in the contemporary accounts. The last of the likely authentic gas attacks took place in Nace, 2 miles from Troutville, on February 3rd. The house that was attacked belonged to an AP Skaggs, and his wife, along with 5 other adults, were all affected by the gas. The group was so badly hurt by the gas that Sheriff Williamson would tell the skeptics who later emerged over the gassing cases that no amount of imagination in the world would make people as ill as the Skaggs are. The attack became as dramatic as the first attack on the Huffman family, and author Michael T. Shoemaker noted that perhaps the gasser wanted to mark his entrance and exit with large attacks. Another similarity to the Huffman attack was that it seemed as though the gas was sprayed into the house 2 times that evening, although investigator Lemon stated that he believed that lingering gas near the ceiling would have been responsible for what seemed to have been a separate attack. The gas had some pretty strange effects on the people in the house, as one of Skaggs' nephews began screaming hysterically that he was trapped in the house, and on the family dog as well. Officer Lemon returned to the house to continue his investigation the next day, and one of the children came in crying that the dog was dying. Lemon went out and saw that the animal was rolling over and over in the snow, just as dogs do when they are sprayed by a skunk. As no skunk owner was present, this certainly seemed odd. A witness later told Michael Shoemaker that the well-trained dog was sick and would not pay attention to commands for some time after the incident.
are now listening to Dancing of Octane Entertainment.
It was at this point that the story began to deteriorate. During the following week, there was 20 attacks reported in nearby Roanoke County and a number of other reports in Lexington, about 30 miles away. And while a few of the later attacks may have been genuine, they lacked the detail of the original incidents and were most likely hysterical reactions to ordinary odors of the result of hoaxes perpetrated by pranksters. In one of these hoaxes, a teenager threw a bottle of insecticide into a woman's window, and a similar incident on February 9th gave the police and the newspaper the opportunity to declare that the gasser mystery was over. It was almost as if the strange figure left Virginia and vanished without a trace, never to return again. And while perhaps the gasser did not return to Butort County, he could have possibly surfaced in Illinois 11 years later. This does it for part one of Storytime regarding the Mad Gasser. The Butort County, Virginia cases are very, very intriguing. Something was being seen, someone or something was being seen. But there was no evidence, and the Mad Gasser was never caught. So, until next time, everybody, I appreciate everybody tuning in on Storytime tonight. Drop us a like, give us a comment. If you have any kind of reports you'd like to, or phenomenon that you would like to have here on Storytime, leave it in the comments section. I'll do work my best on getting it ready. Until then, folks, keep a wary eye out. Keep your ears to the wind and your nose to the ground. Share this channel with your friends. Subscribe for more content. And I'll see you around.